All right, I have 1 o'clock on my clock here, so why don't we go ahead and get started. Welcome to this MAPP seminar. MAPP, as you know from having registered, is the Master of Applied Positive Psychology program at the University of Pennsylvania. And many of the graduates, myself included, are doing free webinars during this time of pandemic. Mine is called Design Your Day: Habits, Practices, and Rituals for Pandemic Times at Home. So let's go ahead and get started. A little bit of background about me. I am a celebrant, which is a specialist on ceremonies and rituals. And a celebrant also officiates gatherings. They have a variety of different ways that they inspire others when we get together in gatherings. I have been recently focusing some of my celebrant work in grief circles and mourning circles due to the pandemic, but that's not what we're here to talk about today. I'm also a facilitator. Some of you know me as an organizational culture specialist. I am in the field of leadership development, and I am a positive psychology practitioner. So what you're going to see on the slides that follow is a true practitioner's view of how to use some of the theories and tools of positive psychology to our best advantage. So here we are in these pandemic times I didn't think I would see. I certainly didn't anticipate it at the beginning of this year or at any time in recent memory. And here are some of the things I've heard from my friends, from others, from social media. I miss my friends. Am I safe? Well, I don't have a commute. Maybe I'll write that book. Better check the news. What day is it? Why can't I do 5th grade math for those who are homeschooling? And just getting through the day is a-okay for me. And all of those types of thoughts and ideas and emotions and experiences are going through our minds. And hopefully in this next 30 minutes, we can have a little time to step away from those rampant thoughts and to think theoretically about what it means to live a good life during this pandemic, and then to act practically on what are some actions we could each take that would help us really enrich our time at home. So first of all, I'd like to start, again, it's Design Your Day, and we're going to look specifically at habits, practices, and rituals, and how we might use those most effectively. But before we get in, I thought we'd start with a very brief ritual, and that is just a brief moment of silence. And we are the lucky ones. So if you're logging in on the webinar today, if you are going to be able to watch webinars on recordings, if you have the time and the luxury in order to do that, we are the lucky ones. We're not the ones out there on the front lines, maintaining society, treating people in our healthcare facilities, etc. So I thought we could do just a brief moment of silence. It's a type of a ritual. And this is in honor of those who are serving society's needs. So that's a simple way to incorporate a ritual into our day. It's the type of a ritual that if you were so inclined, you could incorporate that moment of silence for all of our essential workers and healthcare providers each day. If you wanted to do that, you could engage others in it. You could engage your family or folks who you're residing with, etc. So the idea of habits and practices and rituals is to think about how we currently are living our days, how we're currently spending the time that we have during this pandemic, and to think about ways to make it better. And one way to think about that is to think about one of your better recent days. I know our days are different than they were 3 months ago. For me, I am ending my 5th week of being in physical distancing from others. Others might be newer to it. Some might be having physically distant times for much longer. But think about one of your better recent days. What made it better? The idea of habits, practices, and rituals is we want to design in more of those things. what contributed to our better days, our easier days, maybe our more meaningful days, and to be able to design more of that into our times. So there are lots of different articles out there. I'm grateful for them, and there certainly are a lot of them. So everyone has a take on what some of these basics are, and they're all very important. Things like, even though we're not getting up and going to work, still taking a shower, trying to create regular time slots for meals and other activities that are important to us. Obviously, following the CDC guidelines, washing our hands, etc. And then whatever we have been doing to maintain our health, trying to keep to those sorts of things, whether it's nutritional eating or doing activities, those sorts of things are the basics. So they're kind of like the foundation, the table stakes. We're not going to really be focusing too much on those just absolutely basics. But what we are going to do is get a little more creative with our designs. So habits, practices, and rituals, you'll hear me refer to it as HPR because it's a mouthful otherwise, is a framework for purposeful action. So in the next few minutes, we're going to be spending together getting familiar with this framework. So we're not going to dive particularly deeply into any one type of situation, but rather teach the tool of what this framework is. And I put a quote in here from a student who had been in one of my workshops around HPR. And he said, Peter Drucker once wrote that some people think ideas move mountains, but bulldozers are needed too to do the heavy lifting. And while words do create worlds, that's from one of our positive psychology mentors, David Cooperrider, at some point, dirt needs to be moved. HPR is a framework for action. So it's those habits, practices, and rituals that can actually help us change the way we do things differently, and maybe even become the person that we'd like to be. So how can we use habits, practices, and rituals? Well, they can help us shore up the basics of what our new normal is, however temporary or long-lasting it might be. We can use HPR for resilience, so we can think what habits, practices, and rituals might help us reduce anxiety, might help us increase our positive experiences. We can use HPR to better remote work abilities. So in other words, we can use them to increase our sense of achievement, what we can accomplish in any given day. We can use them for connection, to build community and strengthen relationships. And we can use HPR, habits, practices, and rituals, to create meaning, to find things like a sense of place, or to rediscover what it means to make a home. We can even use HPR to increase our citizenship, might be needed in these times in which we live. So here's the HPR framework at a glance. I'm going to give you distinctions between habits, practices, and rituals, and then we'll look at several different types of examples. And I would say, if you can familiarize yourself with where the chat box is, there will be questions that I'll be asking as we go along, and you can fill in your examples or ideas in the chat box. So there's habit, practices, and rituals. Now let's distinguish between them a little bit. So a habit is an activity. It's to perform activities regularly. We create habits because we want to do the same thing repeatedly. And another way of saying that is we want to hardwire beneficial action. We know that if we go for a run, we know that if we start the day with a inspirational reading or a glass of water, we know that that gets us off to a better start. So habits try to hardwire that. And this is distinct from practices. Practices are where we try to learn and improve our skills. In a practice, we try to achieve mastery. So a habit, we're trying to get the benefits of something that we repeatedly do. In a practice, we're trying to get better and better at something. We're trying to improve. And a ritual is another type of activity. A ritual is used to anchor and to embody. It's really something where we deeply experience a moment, often tied closely to our values, to what matters most to us. And one way of describing it, a person who has written a lot about rituals, a man named Ronald Grimes, and he describes a ritual as something that we feel deeply in our bones. So it's an immersive experience, a ritual. So a shorthand would be that we use habits to automate. We use practices to cultivate or to grow, to get better, to improve. And we use ritual to permeate, to really become that thing that we're trying to experience. So habits are the things that we want to do regularly. We want to hardwire them. We can do them relatively mindlessly and still get benefit from them. Practice, we're trying to achieve mastery, and ritual is something that we're really trying to immerse ourselves in, to permeate. So in terms of the pandemic and well-being, there are a couple different takes. We can use it for our resilience or emotional psychological well-being. One way to do that is we know that positive affect, or there have been studies that show positive affect can help buffer us against catching some rhinovirus, at least was in the study. So what does that mean in terms of habits? What could we automate in our lives to accentuate the positive? Well, we could just notice the positive. We could get better at that. We could set a timer once every hour, once every few hours, and notice one good thing. Just create a habit of being able to recognize the good around us. And so that's something we could do regularly. If we wanted to practice, if we wanted to learn and get better, we could master the art of something called savoring, which is really being aware that we're having a positive or good experience, and to really milk it, to really be able to luxuriate in it, to taste, to see, to really think about it, to amplify the experience. And what about a ritual that would accentuate the positive? It might be something like creating or immersing in a positive portfolio. And that's a term that came from James Pawelski and Barbara Fredrickson, who are great people in the field of positive psychology. Basically, it means collecting things that we know give us a good vibe. So it might be favorite songs, it might be favorite poems, it might be artifacts, it might be things that bring back happy memories. So those are an example of how we can use HPR, habits, practices, and rituals, to accentuate the positive. One of the things that I read the most about is reducing anxiety, that this is also uncertain for us. We have uncertainty around catching the disease, we have uncertainties around time frame, and that creates a lot of anxiety. So let's talk about the habits we could use for anxiety. And here I'm just listing the very briefest ones that we can think of. There's vagus nerve breathing, a deep breathing, which is a way that we can breathe that actually calms our system. It actually helps us to reduce anxiety. And there are many different techniques for it, but the one that I find most helpful is to take long, deep breaths and to double the length of your exhalation compared to your inhalation. So let's just try that one time really quickly. Let's breathe in to the count of 4 and breathe out to the count of 8. So let's inhale 1, 2, 3, 4, and exhale 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So that's an example of how that calming effect, we just did one. I would recommend doing several. Another one for reducing anxiety, obviously, is limiting our news intake. It's so easy to get caught up in what's happening minute by minute. A practice that are known to reduce anxiety are things that we do using our body, that are neck down, they say in positive psychology, that can get us away from some of those anxious moments. So dance, art, cooking, yoga, whatever it is that would involve some activity that isn't just the thought process. And finally, on rituals, you could create a bedtime ritual for yourself that creates a sense of ease and calm as you drift off into sleep. So it might be stretching, it might be using lavender or some kind of relaxing scent to you, it might be a moment of meditation. And here's where Andrew, hi, thanks again for being on board here. We might just use the chat as we go along. So I have a couple more examples of ways to use HPR before we get into our own personal one. But if you have thoughts about ways to reduce anxiety, what habits, practices, or rituals you could use for reducing anxiety, by all means, put those in the chat box and Andrew will call out some of them as we go along. May not be able to get to all of them, but certainly some of them. HPR can be used again to deepen connections. So we've talked so far about accentuating the positive, reducing anxiety, deepening connections. And let me just go quickly through this one. So you could make it a habit of having afternoon video chats. You could practice new skills. You could learn new relationship skills like listening, empathy, those sorts of things. Really study those and become better at them. You could expand your network. That's another type of a practice you could employ. A ritual might be to write a gratitude letter to those close to you or to those at a distance. Do that every night or every few days. And that kind of a ritual would help deepen connections. It would warm your heart as you think of that person. And obviously, if you actually send it to them, it would help to deepen that connection. You can also use HPR for finding meaning. So I actually did a celebration of life in over the New Year's time this year of someone who, a friend's mother, dear friend's mother, who was Phi Beta Kappa. She got a Phi Beta Kappa designation for a degree in home economics, in homemaking. So she's one who actually studied it. And the celebration of life was full of quilts and homemade things. We handed out a ritual of her oatmeal cookie recipe, for example, as part of the celebration. So homemaking is something that we can get familiar with now that we're spending more times at home. So habits, create a habit that for you makes your house a home. It might be tidying up in the evening. It might be using different rooms at regular times of day, having a cup of tea on the porch, for example. Using a practice would be learning new recipes, learning a skill that enhances home aesthetics. So a decorating skill perhaps, or a design skill. Maybe reinventing a room. Maybe there's a space you haven't used in your home and it's time to really make that space come to life. And a ritual for homemaking might be things like creating a family dinner, creating a sacred place in your home, an altar some people call or design, that you can use for reflection, that you can use to really embody what it means to be alive, what it means to be a human, a mother, a father, a grandmother, etc. And let me pause here for a moment and see if you have any other ideas for habits, practices, or rituals that could help really ground you in your home, give you more of a sense of home.
I can jump in and read some of the things that people have been talking about.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah, Mary's talking about the fact that she's been meditating each morning to decrease her anxiety and making
Beautiful.
sure that she also just makes her bed to feel that sense of completion, which I think is just a great
Beautiful.
habit. Kelly talks about walking her dog and making sure that she's exercising in the house, or spending time in the yard to relax under the sun, finding those habitual pieces.
Beautiful.
Meredith's created a daily habit of refreshing her Spanish, que bueno, using Duolingo. Me encanta Duolingo as a way to find meaning for herself.
Thank you, Andrew. I've got a couple more examples that I want to give, and then I want you to come up with some of your own that you can try out. So sense of place is an idea about grounding ourselves in our surroundings, kind of where we live, our community, the city, the village, the nation, the country. And when we think about habits that help us experience that sense of place, it would be taking a walk in the neighborhood each day. So for those of us who commute away from our homes to our work locations, maybe we don't spend as much time getting to know our own closer surroundings. So doing that, getting out of the house. A practice that would help us ground in sense of place would be learn to read nature's signs. What's changing outside your window? What if you go outside on your porch? What trees are in bloom? What trees' leaves are falling? You can make a map. You can learn the history or culture of your city, all of those different types of things that would help us with sense of place in this unusual time where we're spending more time in one place. And then finally, a ritual would be to sit outside daily, to notice your surroundings and really notice them deeply, the scents, the sights, the noises, and then to begin to reflect on how is this place different or the same at different times of day, different days of the week, etc. So finding that sense of place, grounding in sense of place, can be really a practice to enhance well-being. And the last one are examples of citizenship. So citizenship means kind of what we do for the greater good, so to speak. And when we think about our civic duty, is a way to put it, habits that we could do, we could use this pandemic time to flatten the curve. So we could be good citizens by wearing masks, washing our hands, keeping physical distance, etc. We could also use practices to learn about local government, to advocate for something that's important to us, writing letters to the editor, or even starting a movement. What is it you feel your community really needs to pay attention to? Think about how you as a citizen could bring that forward. And finally, a ritual. You could design a ritual that's tied to those values and beliefs that you have. There's an NPR, National Public Radio show that is called This I Believe, where people talk about those beliefs that they hold deeply. You could do it around civic responsibility. You could do it around your values and belief. And did you live by these today? Did you help a neighbor? Did you do other citizen type activities? And let me turn it back to you, Andrew, to see if other people have commented on sense of place or citizenship, finding meaning.
One of them for sense of place, Laura Taylor has talked about the ritual she's created of within her house, creating a home office, and then finding ways very deliberately of moving in and out of that space to designate this is work time and then this is like home time. So you can within the same space. And then several of you have talked about going out into nature. Larissa, who I believe it's her birthday today, so happy birthday, Larissa, going out on nature scavenger hunts with her son to find certain colored flowers or birds or squirrels. A couple other people who've talked about the fact that they're really noticing it's spring and making the time to just really notice the growth that's springing up. And then here's one from Erin Cohen, who really liked the notion of starting a movement. She's definitely a movement starter. She's been thinking about making a gratitude poster for the first responders in her local grocery stores. Oh, you're on mute, Jen.
Oh, absolutely love that. I love the ideas that are coming forward. I'm giving just kind of the only scratching the surface, top of the head ideas. You all know the things that are meaningful or that make sense to you, which is now it's time to do that. So if you had to think about your aim. So think about a year from now, 2 years from now, 10 years from now, when you look back on the pandemic, what is a thing that you'd like to say you spent your time doing? So becoming more resilient, becoming a better family member, contributing to my community, doing a special passion project, writing that book, or doing other things that are really important to you. So think about that for a moment and maybe put in the chat box some of those aims that you have. What is it that you would like to look back and say, I spent time doing this? And it doesn't have to be grand. It doesn't have to be, the equivalent of a moonshot, but it's something that's important to you. What would you put in that box?
Some of the things that we're hearing. Do you want me to read them out, Jan?
Yeah, please, Andrew. Thank you.
Doing watercolor, learning to play chess, learning a new language like French, finishing her MAPP capstone. Go for you, Darlene. We support that. Being a good friend or daughter, building a coaching practice, writing articles, doing groceries for our parents, buying flowers for neighbors, hosting virtual chats, aiming to be more kind, strengthening our connections and growing professionally, using time to get to the second edition of one of the books of a book that I've already written, spending time on things I always feel like I don't have time for.
Amazing.
Yeah, so many more. Yeah.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you. And so now it's time for you to think about, with that as your aim, beautiful aims that you each put, what is a habit, a practice, or a ritual that you could create for yourself that would reinforce that aim, that would move you closer in that direction? And if you have a habit, a practice, and a ritual, that's fantastic. You'll be moving even closer, even more quickly, perhaps, toward it. But the idea is just to think this way. What are those actions that you can take that will help you achieve that aim? And Andrew, if you see some coming forward, some examples of a habit, a practice, or a ritual that would help them achieve their aim.
Sure. Elaine talks about pausing in the morning to breathe and just express gratitude.
Beautiful.
Lisa talks about trying to write in her journal every night right before she goes to bed. Laura talks about creating and using a reach rotation list of loved ones, and then trying to be really specific about reaching out and deliberately connecting. Other people are thinking about writing articles, writing 3 times a week, doing the groceries twice a week, making it a point to attend Pilates class twice a week. So really kind of creating kind of specific goals. Habits is reaching out to networks to enlist clients, practicing blog posts, rituals, sinking into the joy of coaching with existing clients.
I love all those. So thank you so much for taking a moment to think about what ways you could manifest this in your life, and for sharing those on the chat box. The idea of habits, practices, and rituals are that they're all activities. They're all things that we can design into our days that take us closer to whatever's most important to us, whether that's living a meaningful life, whether it's deepening our connections with our family, with our partners, with those around us, or whether it's accomplishing projects, accomplishing work, the work that you have that you're paid to do, or your passion projects. But thinking about it in these ways is a way to really help us bring these things to life. A few final thoughts. I know these 30-minute webinars go by so quickly, but don't get hung up on the difference between a habit, practice, and a ritual. So if we were in a day-long or a 2-day seminar, we'd really draw some distinctions, and there might be activities you've listed. We could move from one category to the other depending on its goal. But for the purposes of living well during this pandemic, just think of what's an activity that makes sense for you and call it what you will. The nomenclature isn't that important. You can pick and choose. So if your aim is to deepen your connections, it may be that you have 2 habits you can think of, and there isn't a ritual that comes to mind, and that's perfectly fine. You don't think you have to have one of each in order to make progress or to move forward. And the other thing, obviously, is to really experiment, to have fun with it, to think about, I'm going to try this out today and see if it worked, if you think it was something that you could keep on or continue on. And let me just check in with you, Andrew, on the chat box if there are any other questions or comments coming in. And we're going to be wrapping up very shortly.
One quick question that's come in.
Good.
What happens if somebody's disappointed with a practice that they seem to be failing at?
Yeah, so that's that whole idea of experimenting. And it may be that you have a certain aim that isn't, like, you haven't really gotten to know and understand. And whatever that aim is, the practice isn't the right practice for making it come to life. So the idea might be to try a different practice, to try to experiment, to try it a different way, to really use it as a time of learning. And if it's something that you're very determined to do, and you feel like it would be something you want to learn or to cultivate, maybe look for a coach or a partner or a buddy or someone who could help you and maybe encourage you along the way. Those would be my thoughts on it. Anything
No more
else on the chat
questions.
line? Yeah, okay, great,
No.
awesome. So in closing, a lot of people reach out to me about, helping them create a ritual or design habits, those sorts of things. And you should feel free to do that. My email address is jan.b.stanley@gmail. And I'm also on Twitter and Facebook as Jan Stanley. And a couple things to look forward to is an organization. I'll be doing some promotion of an organization called MAPP, which is near and dear to my heart, and going to be training up what I'm calling civic celebrants. So people who can use skills like habits, practices, and rituals to help people cultivate sense of place and spirit of community, and also those who can do it within their organization. So look for those this fall, later this year. And in closing, I just have a very brief poem. This is a ritual ending with words that I would like to read. It's called Sometimes by David White. Sometimes, if you move carefully through the forest, breathing like the ones in the old stories who could cross a shimmering bed of dry leaves without making a sound, you come to a place whose only task is to trouble you with tiny but frightening requests, conceived out of nowhere, but in this place, beginning to lead everywhere. Requests to stop what you are doing right now and to stop what you are becoming while you do it. Questions that can make or unmake a life. Questions that have patiently waited for you. Questions that have no right to go away. So as we conclude this webinar on habits, practice, and rituals, think about those questions for you and the opportunity that's in front of us to really explore what is most meaningful to us and to take action so that we can be living our values and really making the most of the situation that we find ourselves in right now. Many thanks for joining me today. I greatly appreciate it. Andrew, so thankful for you and helping us out. Any final chat comments that you'd like to share?
Just huge amounts of gratitude to you, Jan.
Oh, awesome. That's great. Well, thank you, everyone. Oop, I don't know what I did there. And we're going to go ahead and stop now, but thanks so much, everyone. Habits, practices, and rituals to help you design your day.